Hey everybody, and welcome back. We are in the middle of a pretty big series on composite photography. And today we're going to be talking about masking, selections, and all kinds of good stuff to get you heading in the right direction. We've also been in the studio the last couple of days getting some great photo content for you, so watch for those coming quickly behind this. But without further ado, let's hop into Photoshop and start talking about masking and selections. We're ready to get started on our selections and creating a new mask here. But first I just want to tell you that we have gone over the pen tool and pathing a little bit more extensively in another video. So if you haven't watched that one yet, I'd recommend taking a break and hopping out and watching it before you move on to this one. That being said, we already have our paths all done in this paths palette or panel here. And I'm going to be using those just like I did at the end of the pathing tutorial. So without further ado, let's get going. Now the first thing that I want to do is I want to turn this path that says Kyle, and that's actually my writer. So if you click this, I'm going to click this so you can see my path going around the writer. And all I need to do is Control or Command click this path and it'll turn it into a selection. So there you go. There's my selection of my writer. But now we're saying, uh-oh, the spokes aren't selected. So what do we do about that? Well, this is kind of an interesting one. Here, the spokes are selected on a separate layer in the Paths palette. And so what I need to do is I actually need to take that out of my current selection. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to Control or Command plus Alt or Option click. So I'm holding Control and Alt, and then I'm going to click on this spokes, and you'll see my little hand turns into a minus, and that means it's going to subtract this selection. So when I click on that, you'll see now the inside of these spokes are going to be taken away and masked out on my selection. The same is true for Control Shift click, but it's the opposite. So if you Control Shift click on it, it's going to add it. So if I do that, it's going to put it back so that it's part of the selection. But in this case, we want it gone. So we're going to Control and Alt click. And there you go. That one's deselected. Now, one of the things that I like to do is I like to feather this selection by 0.5 pixels. Why 0.5, you say? Well, in my experience, that's a good starting point. It's not too soft. It doesn't tend to be quite as hard as not feathering at all. Now, the long way to do this is you're going to go to Filter, then, you're going to go to Select, then Modify, and then Feather. But as you can see, right next to it, there is a shortcut of Shift F6. And because we love shortcuts, that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to click away from here. And I'm just going to hit Shift F6 on my keyboard. And now it's going to ask me, how much do I want to feather this selection? So we'll put in 0.5. And that's feathered. And then I'm going to go ahead and click this new mask icon right here. And there's my bike rider completely selected out and ready to hopefully go into a composite. Okay, so now that we've made our mask, we would all hope that that's the end of it and we just get to go in and make cool composites, but unfortunately it's not quite that simple. Now we need to go in and make sure our mask is clean and refine it in any way necessary so that when we drop it into our background, it's going to look realistic. The first thing that you'll notice is you'll probably miss some things, especially with something this complex when there's all kinds of spokes and little squares. And in this case, I missed this kind of kite-looking shape down here. And so the easiest and quickest way to do this is just select your mask, and then grab the brush tool, B for the brush tool, and make it kind of hard. So we're at a 75% hardness. And then just brush out the area that you missed. And it's going to be a little tedious. You want to get in there and be pretty exact. And to make these straight lines, I'm just holding the Shift key. So you click once, then Shift click, and that makes a straight line. So I'm just going to kind of mask that out. And then I'm going to look at my spokes. And this little spot right here should be gone, so I'm just gonna go into there and do that. It's a little rough, so I'm gonna do a little bit more. There we go. These spokes look pretty good. Okay, so that's the first thing. You just want to make sure you didn't miss any big spots. And now I'm actually going to come in here, and I think I'm going to take this out. That doesn't look right to me. And again, I talked about last time, if it doesn't look right, you want to make it look correct, especially when you're doing a composite. So I'm just going to brush this out because I know it's going to look weird once we drop it into a background. So that looks good. We can address this hair later. I don't know if we'll leave it or not. But there's our rider selected. Now what we want to look at is the edges. Now obviously I'm seeing white showing through here, and since this is going onto a dark background, that is not a good thing. So here is a cool and quick way to fix that. So what I want you to do is you're going to Control or Command click on your mask to turn the mask into a selection. So Control or Command click, just like that. Now what we're going to do is we're going to actually mask out that portion. So what you need to do is invert the selection so that it's selecting the background. So what you're going to do is hit Control Shift I or Command Shift I on your keyboard. And I'm going to back out so you can see now the background is selected and the rider is not. Now what we need to do is actually feather this so we can start to brush away some of that white. So again, you can go into the select and all that kind of jazz, but we're just going to hit Shift F6 and we're going to do a feathered radius of 1 and then hit OK. Now, when you're dealing with something this tight, you want to get these marching ants away because you're not going to be able to see what you're doing. So you're going to hit Control or Command H, and that's going to hide the selection so you can see what you're doing. Now, keep in mind, it is still selected. So if you go away to do something else, that background's going to be selected, and that can be a little bit frustrating. So make sure you undo the selection once you're done working. So I'm going to go in here. I still have a hard brush. And I'm going to make it a little bigger, and I'm just going to brush with black at 100%, and I'm going to start to brush away the edges that I don't like. So a little bit of white, a little bit of green, whatever's going on there. And we're just going to brush away it until we have nice, clean lines all the way around. Now, the cool thing about Photoshop is it kind of lets you eat into the selection. So you'll see as I'm brushing, it's actually taking away a little more each time. I'm assuming they did that on purpose, which to that I say thank you. And if they didn't, then please leave it because it works awesome. And you really just want to touch the places that you see the white. So right here, there's a little bit. And around his helmet, there's a little bit. That hair we'll address later. Looking good through here. Here's a little bit in the selection I just did. Around his bike. That looks pretty good. The spokes are going to kind of be a different story. I think we're going to have to end up darkening those. But it would work on the spokes. You see it just like that. I'm going to leave that for now. Let's see, we got a little green around the chain. Around the bike. So again, just brush until it's gone. And you should be tight enough on your selection that it should only take 1 pixel of feathering to get these white outlines gone. Now with these spokes, I'd say there is a little white outline, so I'm going to just go ahead and take that off. You got to be careful with these really thin lines, though. You don't want to take too much away. This one definitely. Okay. So that looks a lot better. You can see we don't have the white edges going on around here. And when we put that into a dark background, it's going to look a lot cleaner once it goes in. We're going to go over some of this more detailed color correction, shadowing, that kind of stuff in another tutorial. But since it's kind of glaring on this image, I want to show you guys really quickly a way to get these spokes looking a little bit more normal. And what's happening here is there's some of the background showing through, but then also they're being lit oddly, so it just doesn't feel quite right. And so what I did, and I'm just going to turn this layer on so you guys can see, is I colored them so that they don't look quite so bright and odd. And the way I did that was I made my selection active for my wheels. Then I created a new layer called Color Spokes. And then I just went in and selected a darker color from the spoke. So right here is good. So with your brush tool, you can hold the Alt or Option key and it's going to turn it into your color picker. And I'm going to do just kind of right in here that nice kind of dark plum color. And then you can start painting because you have this selected. Again, we want to hide this selection. So Command or Control H. And then start painting on the color. Now, I didn't feel the need to have you watch me do all of this painting, so I already did it. I'm going to back out a little bit so you can see. So I did all the spokes, and then what I put on this layer is I turned the blend mode to soft light so that it kind of used the underlying color and shadows and things like that without becoming too overwhelming. So here it is after, before, after, and going into a composite. That's going to look a whole lot better. Again, like I said, that's a really brief way to do it, but we're going to cover all that stuff a lot more extensively when we actually start putting our composite together in a couple of weeks. So we just finished talking about kind of refining the edge on your own and how to feather it and then brush it out. There are some other ways in Photoshop that, depending on the background you're pulling your image from, can be a lot faster and a lot more efficient without using the pen tool or anything like that. So I'm going to walk you through those right now, just dependent upon what kind of image you're doing. That in mind, when you're doing a composite, you really want to think through what the background is going to be. In this particular image, I wanted the background to be white. And so I put myself against a white background so that when I pulled it out later, it was going to be really quick and really, really easy. And let's just talk about, before ever getting in here in camera raw, what you can do. Now, if you see the white background, if you click this little triangle up here, you can see where it's actually what's called clipped out. That means it's completely white. So it's at 255 across the board on red, green, and blue, which means it's completely gone. There's nothing there. It's just white. That, for selection purposes, is actually really good because it's easy for Photoshop to see it, and it's easy to select something away from that background. So I'm going to click OK, and I'm going to come in here. And there goes my smart object. So I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to grab my magic wand tool. So over here in your palette, there is two tools under here. There's the quick selection tool, which we'll talk about in a second, and there's the magic wand tool. The cool thing about the magic wand tool is that it is really fast, and it's also slightly customizable. So it's not a what you see is what you get kind of thing. You can make some cool changes. Let's talk about the toolbar for just a second. Up here, contiguous means, are they touching? So if I click on a pixel over here, it'll select this stuff, but it's not going to jump over to here and start selecting pixels of the same color. So it depends on what you're doing. I'm not going to say that's something you should always have on or you should always turn off. Sometimes you need it on, sometimes you need it off, and we'll talk about that in just a second. Anti-aliasing, it just has to do with kind of refining the edge of the pixels. Usually you want that turned on. And then the tolerance is of 5, was what I have it on right now. Now, the tolerance actually refers to the shades of darkness and lightness, which is very interesting. But really, the easy way to remember it is that the smaller the number, the less tolerant it's going to be. The bigger the number, the more tolerant it's going to be. So as an example, if I click here, you can see it stops selecting down here because it's too many shades away to actually count it in my selection. Now, if I deselect that and I jump that to 50, and then I click again, now you'll see not only is the entire thing selected, but also some of my ear has been selected because it's enough inside of that range to actually select this. In the past, I've found that usually a smaller tolerance is better, and then just click a little bit more. But it kind of depends on you and what you're selecting from. You'll have to play with it a little bit to get it exactly dialed in the way that you want to. Then up here, you'll have the sample size, which is a 3x3 average, which means it's going to sample the pixel and then the 3 around it to start testing colors. So if you're in the white, if it's a little bit off, then it'll use the colors that are close to it as well. You can change this to a point sample or 5x5, 11x11, depending on how big the area is that you want to select. Point sample is very specific. 3x3 and 5x5 work really well, but play with it and you'll figure it out as you go. So with all that being said, let's make a selection and turn that selection into a mask. So what we're going to do is we're going to click once, and I have contiguous current turned on, so it's only going to select the pixels that are attached to the other pixel. So I'll click this. You see that's all selected. Now we want to add these pixels down here, so we're going to shift and click. So you'll see a little plus sign pop up on my wand. If I click again, then I'm going to just keep clicking with the shift click turned on. And now I'm going to come over here and I'm going to get this area selected as well. Now here's a kind of interesting thing. As you can see, my hair inside is not selected because it is cut off by these strands of hair. And this is where that contiguous versus non-contiguous comes in. So if I deselect this and then I shift click again, you'll see now all the hairs and the little kind of idiosyncrasies of the hair are selected. And this is a really beautiful selection. You can see even inside the little buttonhole is selected. And I don't see anything on the jacket being selected. There's a little bit down here we need to do. So I'm going to turn contiguous back on and I'm going to shift click down here. That looks great. Now sometimes one of the things you have to watch for is little highlights. So around zippers, if you see right here, this one is actually selected right now. So I'm going to grab my lasso tool or the L on your keyboard. I'm going to Alt click and circle that. So if I Alt, you'll see it turn to minus, and I'm just going to circle it. And now that's not selected anymore. So if you see anything like that, that's the really fast way to do it. Just Alt click and circle. And that looks like a really great selection. Now, we're missing this whole area over here. Well, the great thing is because it's so far away from our actual subject, we can just circle it or marquee it, whatever you want to do. We're already on the lasso tool, so we might as well use that. And I'm going to shift click this one, so you'll see the plus sign come up on my lasso tool. And I'm just going to shift, I'm going to circle this area. And now this entire thing is selected. So that's a really quick and efficient way to do a selection using the magic wand. Again, it really depends on what your background is, but you can play with it and see what it does. Okay, so now we've got this great selection, but what do we do? Well, the interesting thing is that we actually selected the background in this case, so we need to invert this selection so that I'm selected instead of the background. So I'm going to do that cool shortcut we just learned a second ago of Control-Shift-I or Command-Shift-I on a Mac. And you'll see it go from the outside now to just being around me. And now all we have to do is turn this into a mask. So we're going to come over here and click the mask icon, the new mask icon. And you'll see it pop up. I'm going to Alt or Option click this mask so you guys can see what we just made. And it's a really clean mask. Granted, it's very, very hard, which we're going to talk about, but it looks fantastic. You can see all the little tiny details in the hair all taken away. And you can see below, I already have a white layer, and you really can't even tell with that mask on and off that there's a mask on there. So that looks great. But let's just say we wanted to soften this mask a little bit. Well, the cool thing is that the algorithm for the Gaussian blur tool and the feather tool are exactly the same. So if we have this mask and we want to make some softening changes to it after the fact, all we have to do is use Gaussian blur. So we're going to click on our mask to select it, then go open to Filter, then Blur, and Gaussian blur. And then it's going to pop up a preview of our mask with the blur on it. And right now it's at 0.5. just so you can see the difference. If I was to go to 10, it's really going to make it super blurry, which we don't want. So let's just call it 1. I think that's plenty. And you probably won't see a whole lot of difference here, but just for demonstration purposes, now our mask is just a little bit softer than it was before. So I'll show you before and after. Let me zoom in really tight here. Here's our before and after. Here's our before and after. So it adds just a little bit of softness to it, and that's a great way to kind of soften the entire edge after the fact if you decide it needs to have a blur around the whole thing. But what if you don't want to blur around the whole thing and maybe just one small portion needs to be softened? Well, I'm glad you asked, because here's how to do that. So I'm going to undo this, and then I'm going to grab my lasso tool, and that is just the L key on the keyboard. So this time, I'm just going to circle the area that I want to apply the blur to. So we'll say we want to soften this little area right here. I'm going to circle this. Now, what we need to do before we start to blur this area is we need to feather it so that it blends in to the other parts of the mask a little more seamlessly. So we're going to do the Shift F6. And we're going to feather, let's say 30 pixels for this one. And this is a number you're going to want to play with. It's not the same number every time. It really depends on how much you're blurring and what you're doing to the mask. But let's just say 30 for this one. And now that we feathered that, this is what this means, is we have this line right here. And we've feathered it in 30 pixels up and down, so that it's going to blend. It's not just going to go straight from soft to hard. It'll actually have a little bit of blend from the soft to the hard, so it doesn't look so abrupt when we blur it. So if we go back up and we have our mask selected, we're going to go into blur and Gaussian blur. And let's go ahead and do, and we can even do 2 pixels just so we demonstrate it. And then we're going to click OK and deselect. And now you can see that this edge just doesn't go from hard to soft. It goes from hard down to softer, softer, softer until we get to the actual blur. And that is a really cool thing, because you don't have this hard blend from one to the other. And now we've effectively softened this portion of the mask, left this portion hard, but they don't just butt up once against each other, so it makes it look a lot cleaner. So it probably won't look very much different. Yeah, you can see how this looks blurry now. But for a photo where you're using a shallower depth of field or something like that, this is a really useful tool so that you can be able to blend soft edges into hard edges using the selection that you already have. All right, so I'm pretty stoked about this next part. I will tell you that I actually just watched some tutorials to get myself a little more updated, and this most recent release of Photoshop, they have really done a killer job of working on the Refine Edge tool, and now it's actually called the Select and Mask. So I'm still going to show you what I was going to show you, but it's cool because it's a lot more effective and a lot more efficient than it used to be. So I do want to go over the Quick Select tool with you, and then I want to show you how to refine that edge. So to get the Quick Select tool, it's over here in your tool palette, and the same place as the magic wand. And if you see it, I actually have it selected right now, but before we had the magic wand tool, and now we're going to use the Quick Select tool. Now, I forgot to mention in the previous part of this that the W key is the shortcut for that. So I just remember wand and the W. And if you hold the Shift and hit W, it's going to take you back and forth between the tools. So there's your wand, and we'll go back to the Quick Select tool. Now, this tool is really fast, especially when there's contrast involved. It basically works by checking edges and highlights and shadows and things like that. And with math, I don't even know how they do it, but it selects what you want. So I'm just going to start painting over with the Quick Select tool. And you can just see how blazing fast this tool is to get everything selected. But now you're saying, well, there's these little parts here that with the magic wand tool, those were selected already and they're not there. And that is what the selected mask, what used to be called refine edge, is going to do for you. So we're going to hit the selected mask. And then over here now, I want to bring to your attention is this new palette of tools. This one is actually your refine edge. And so you want to click that one. And they have a new thing. This used to just be from marching ants on and overlay and on black and that kind of thing so you could see what you were doing. And now they have one called onion skin, which is really cool. It's like a transparency. So if we come over here, I'm going to push that up to, let's just say around 50%. So I can start to see what I'm missing. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to take this refine edge tool and I'm just going to start to brush over the areas that are not right. So there's those there. You can see these ones are a little bit gone. This, and you can just see them kind of magically appearing. Now this does have a lot to do with the fact that they are on white. But man, if you look at this, this mask is just amazing. The changes they made to this most recent refine edge are really, really cool. Definitely worth your time. I'm actually going to go over my eyebrow here really quick and kind of play with that one. And I think that looks really great. So then down here, just like before, let me say something really quick. The edge detection is still there, where you can actually push how much of the edge it sees. Smart radius, where it looks for the edge on its own, is still there, so you guys can play with those on your own and kind of figure those out. Global refinements, a quick note on those, I don't use those. A shout out to Scott Kelby, who kind of taught me this tool a while back, and he doesn't use them either. It really messes with your mask in a way that is not useful later on. So I wouldn't use this. If you want to play with it, please feel free. And then down at the bottom here is your output settings. And you can just say, hey, what are we going to do? Are we going to do new layer with mask? In this case, let's do a new layer with mask so you guys can see what we did. And then I'm just going to click OK. And then let's take a look at how cool and how clean that is. I mean, it's pretty incredible down to strands of hair, which is awesome. So here's that all masked out, sitting on the white. It really depends on what you're doing, but that is the quick select tool, combining it with a new select and mask, which used to be called refine edge. So give that a try. I think you'll really be impressed by it. All right, team, we have covered a lot of stuff today. Hopefully this has been useful to you guys and you can really start to implement it into your workflow. If you have any questions, shoot me a comment. And if there's anything that I touched on that you guys are having questions about, let me know and I will see what I can do about launching another tutorial clarifying or anything like that. As for now, we're going to be moving along. We're getting ready to shoot some cool stuff in the studio. And then this will all start coming together as we do a full-blown composite and start talking about special effects and all that kind of fun stuff that comes along with composite photography. Until next time, guys, thank you so much for watching. Make sure you click subscribe to keep all these awesome tutorials coming. And as always, be awesome.